The alarm had been screaming for 47 hours straight. Captain Lisa stood at the observation window of the Meridian, staring down at 442b as the red planet hung in the darkness of space like a dying eye. Behind her, the crew moved quietly through the corridors of the research vessel. Everyone knew what those three bright dots on the radar meant. They were not coming to trade. The Vex warships appeared on sensors 3 days ago. They had been closing the distance slowly at first, then faster, then with clear intent. Lisa had sent out the distress signal immediately after confirming what she was seeing. A research vessel with mining operation scanners and a handful of defensive weapons could do nothing against 3 military warships. The Meridian was designed to study planets, not fight wars. Down on the colony below, Governor Henry was having the same thoughts. He stood in the operations center of the main settlement, watching the same 3 red dots on his own screens. Around him, people ran back and forth with equipment and supplies. Someone was crying. Someone else was shouting orders. The noise filled the room like water filling a container, rising and rising until it seemed the walls might burst. The colony held 2,400 people. That number kept running through his mind. 2,400 men, women, and children, families that had left Earth 5 years ago to build something new on this world. They had constructed underground bunkers, water processing systems, hydroponic farms. They had dug into the rock and made a home. Now all of that hung in the balance. Moved to the communications station, where a young woman named was working the radio. Her hands shook as she adjusted the frequency. "Still nothing from the fleet?" asked, though he already knew the answer. "No, sir," said. "The signal went out clear enough, but the nearest human ships are almost 2 weeks away at fastest jump speed. The Vex will be here in 4 hours." Nodded slowly. 4 hours. That was the time they had left. 4 hours to prepare people who had been living their lives in peace just days ago. 4 hours to turn a mining colony into a fortress. Above them, Captain Lisa was receiving the same information from her first officer, a tall man named George who had served with her for 6 years. They stood together, watching the planet below and the enemy ships approaching from the darkness above. "All personnel to battle stations," Lisa ordered. The words felt strange in her mouth. Battle stations, like they were a military vessel, like they had real guns that could do real damage. "Captain," George said carefully, "the Meridian was not built for combat operations." "I know," Lisa replied, "but we will fight anyway. We have people down there depending on us." The Vex made their first demands an hour before arrival. Their message came in through the communications system, a voice that sounded like grinding metal and crashing stone. "Human settlement on 442b. This is the Vex Dominion fleet. You are in violation of sector protocols. Your mining operation is unauthorized. You will surrender all equipment, all resources, and all data to our command. Failure to comply will result in orbital bombardment. You have until our arrival to respond." Listened to the message 3 times. Then he made his decision. He opened a channel that would reach everyone in the colony, everyone in the bunkers, everyone who was huddled together waiting to hear what would happen next. "This is Governor," he said, and he forced his voice to be steady. "We will not surrender. We are not resources to be taken. We are people. We are human beings, and we will not give up our home. Everyone to the deep bunkers. Seal all upper-level access points. We will survive this." The people below heard his words. Some felt courage rise in their chests. Some felt fear dig deeper. But they moved. They gathered what they could carry and descended into the tunnels that their own hands had carved from the stone of this alien world. In the medical center, Dr. Hart was preparing for casualties he did not want to imagine. He worked with 2 nurses and a handful of volunteers, setting up equipment, checking supplies, making sure everything was ready for the worst. He had studied medicine to save lives, not to deal with the aftermath of bombardment. But here he was, and here he would stay. In the engineering section, a team led by Henry's daughter, a woman named Victoria, was working to reinforce the structural integrity of the bunkers. They welded metal plates, pumped concrete, tried to make stone strong enough to survive an attack from the sky. Victoria's hands bled from the work, but she did not stop. Neither did her team. Up in space, Captain Lisa made her final preparations. She ordered the Meridian to move into a position between the colony and the approaching Vex ships. It was a symbolic move more than anything else, but symbols mattered. The message it sent was clear: you will have to go through us. The crew of the Meridian was small, maybe 200 people. They would face 3 warships with a total crew of thousands. The odds were not just bad, they were impossible. But Lisa stood straight at her captain's chair and waited. The first of the Vex warships broke through the upper atmosphere of 442b at exactly 1400 hours ship time. Its hull was dark as a bruise, covered in what looked like spikes but were actually weapons emplacements. When it opened fire, the sky above the colony lit up like hellfire had come down to Earth. The defensive shield generator that the colony had installed took the first strike. The explosion was visible from the bunker where Governor stood watching on the live camera feed. The generator was gone. The shield was gone. All that stood between the colony and complete destruction now were the rock and steel of their underground home. The Meridian began to fire its weapons at the approaching ships. The beams of light stretched across the void of space, small and pathetic against the massive Vex vessels. They struck the hull of the lead warship and did almost nothing. The Vex did not even change course. Lisa watched her weapons fire impact the enemy shields. She saw the light bounce away, the energy dispersed and ineffective. She turned to George. "Keep firing," she said. "Do not stop." Message came through at 300 hours on the bridge of the USS Valiant. Commander Jacob Hayes was in his quarters when the alert sounded. He was awake in seconds, moving with the practiced efficiency of a military man who had learned that hesitation meant death. By the time he reached the bridge, the entire crew was already assembled at their stations. The communications officer, a woman named, was standing with her hand over her mouth. In front of her, the message was repeating on the screens. A colony under attack. A research vessel trying to defend the indefensible. 2,400 people who might die in the next few hours. Hayes read the data quickly. The location was marked clearly, 442b. The distance was noted, 2 weeks away at normal jump speed. But that was if they followed protocol, if they took time to gather their full fleet, if they did not push the engines past their rated limits. He looked at the 3 other ships in his battle group. The heavy cruisers Mars and Apollo, both solid and dependable. The destroyers Swift and Hunter, sleek and fast. 5 ships total, against 3 Vex warships. Hayes moved to his captain's chair and sat down. The crew watched him, waiting to hear what they would do. "Get me all available data on the Vex forces at that location," Hayes ordered. "I want to know ship classifications, weapon systems, and estimated crew sizes, and get the engineering crew on the line. Tell them I need everything the Valiant can produce. We are going to push the jump engines further than they have ever been pushed." The officers moved without complaint. These were not young recruits asking why. These were hardened soldiers who understood that people were dying, and the only question that mattered was how fast they could respond. Pulled up the data on the Vex ships. 3 military vessels, 1 destroyer class, 2 cruiser class, all larger than anything the human fleet had in the immediate area, all with weapons designed to bombard planets from orbit. Hayes studied the images. The Vex had always believed that bigger was better, that technology was everything. They had never fought an enemy that was willing to sacrifice everything to protect civilians. Humans from Earth were different. Humans came from a harsh world where survival required more than weapons. It required will. It required the ability to keep fighting when defeat seemed certain. "Set course for 442b, Hayes said, "and get me communication with the colony. I want them to know that help is coming." Captain Daniel Brooks was in his quarters aboard the Valiant when the announcement came over the ship-wide system. He was in the middle of writing a report when the general quarters alarm sounded. He stood immediately, already moving toward the door before the command came through. Brooks had been a soldier for 30 years. He had commanded the Valiant for 2 years, and he was proud of his crew. They were the best fighters in the human fleet, trained in tactics that maximized their advantages against larger, more heavily armed opponents. When the order came to make best speed for 442b, Brooks felt something harden in his chest. This was what they trained for. This was what being human meant. When someone called for help, you answered. He arrived at the bridge to find the crew already in motion. Helm was plotting the jump coordinates. Engineering was reporting ready status. Weapons was running through the firing sequences. The Valiant was a new ship, the first of a class designed to prove that humans could match the Vex in real combat situations. "Sir, we have a message from Commander Hayes," said. "He confirms we are going to make maximum speed to the colony. The other ships in our battle group are matching our course." Brooks nodded. 5 ships against 3. Those were better odds than the research vessel had, but the Vex were still superior in firepower. This would be a fight, not a victory lap. He moved to the tactical display and studied the route to 442B. Normal jump would take 2 weeks, but if they pushed hard, if they maintained high jump velocity and took risks with the gravitational calculations, they might cut that in half, maybe less. Captain, his first officer, commander, stepped forward. We should inform the crew of the operation we are undertaking. Brooks moved to the communication system and activated ship-wide broadcast. Every person aboard the Valiant, from the engineering crew in the deep engine rooms to the maintenance personnel in the corridors, could hear his voice. This is Captain Brooks, he said. We have received a distress call from a human colony under attack by Vex warships. We are responding at maximum speed. Our mission is to protect those people and drive back the enemy. This will be a dangerous operation. Some of you may not make it home, but every one of you has volunteered to serve in this fleet, and you all know what that means. It means we do not leave our people behind. It means we fight with everything we have. I am proud to serve with you. Let us go save some lives. The crew cheered. It was a sound that echoed through every deck of the Valiant. Men and women who understood that they were about to head into combat, and they did it anyway. Because that was what humans did. That was what being part of a civilization that protected its own meant. In the engine room, Chief Engineer Frank was already working on pushing the jump engines beyond their normal limits. The Valiant's propulsion system was cutting edge, designed with redundancies and fail-safes. But Frank knew every system, every component, every equation. He could squeeze more speed out of these engines if he was willing to take risks. He looked at his team, young faces and old faces, humans from different backgrounds, different cultures, different nations. All of them were human. All of them were going to help save people they had never met on a world they had never seen. All right, people, Frank said. Let us light this thing up. We are going to the edge of what this engine can do and maybe a little beyond. If something breaks, we fix it. If something catches fire, we put it out. We are going to get to that colony as fast as possible. The engineering crew moved into action. They began adjusting parameters, fine-tuning fuel flow, optimizing jump calculations. It was dangerous work. It was work that could kill them if something went wrong, but Frank saw no hesitation in any face. On the bridge, Brooks watched as the Valiant prepared for jump. Around him, his crew worked with calm precision. These were people who had trained for combat, who had studied tactics, who had prepared mentally for the moment when they would have to make decisions that meant life or death. The jump sequence began. The engines hummed with power as the Valiant pushed toward the edge of normal space. Commander Hayes gave the signal from the lead ship, and all 5 human vessels jumped simultaneously into hyperspace. The normal trip would take 2 weeks. The fleet was going to try to do it in 5 to 7 days. They would push their ships beyond the manufacturer's recommendations. They would risk engine failure and structural damage, but they would arrive in time to make a difference. As the Valiant vanished into hyperspace, Brooks stood on his bridge and looked at the faces of his crew. The jump exit was violent. Alarms screamed through the corridors of the USS Valiant as the ship tore back into normal space. The sudden transition from hyperspace always hit hard, but this time it hit harder because they were traveling at speeds that were beyond safe limits. Captain Daniel Brooks gripped his chair as the ship shook around him. "Status report," Brooks commanded as the shaking stopped, and the Valiant settled into normal space. "We are in system," reported. 442B is ahead of us. The colony is still under bombardment. The research vessel Meridian is still firing, but enemy fire is incoming. Brooks looked at the tactical display. The 3 Vex warships were in orbit above the colony, raining fire down on the surface. Below them, the Meridian was putting up a fight, but it was clear the research vessel was being overwhelmed. Explosions lit up the upper atmosphere. The colony's defenses were failing. The rest of the human battle group came through the jump portal seconds after the Valiant. The Mars and Apollo jumped in on the flanks, and the 2 destroyers Swift and Hunter took up rear positions. Commander Jacob Hayes was on the communications line immediately. "All ships, this is Hayes. Full combat formation. Weapons hot. Target the nearest Vex cruiser. Do not hold back. These people are dying down there." Brooks activated the ship-wide communications. "All hands, this is the captain. We have enemy contact. Battle stations. Go hot on all weapons. Do not hold fire. We are here to fight." The crew of the Valiant had trained for this moment 1,000 times. They had run simulations, studied tactics, prepared mentally for combat against a superior enemy. But training was not the same as reality. When the first volley of human missiles left the launch tubes, when the first energy weapons fired, when the first impact struck an enemy ship, everything became real. The lead Vex destroyer took a direct hit from a missile fired by the Valiant. The explosion lit up space for a moment. The Vex ship's shields flared and held, but the impact was strong enough to force it to break off its attack run on the colony. "Direct hit," the weapons officer, a young man named Robert, called out. "Enemy shields are holding, but they are damaged. Power signatures are dropping." The Meridian, seeing the arrival of the human battle group, stepped up its attack. Captain Lisa and her crew had been fighting a hopeless battle, but now they had allies. The research vessel's weapons, which had been so ineffective alone, now added to a coordinated assault. The second Vex cruiser turned its attention away from the colony and toward the arriving human ships. It opened fire, sending pulses of pure energy across the void of space. One of those pulses struck the heavy cruiser Apollo, and the ship's shields flared bright. Commander Hayes ordered his ships to press the attack. The Mars moved in on the starboard side of the second Vex cruiser, unleashing everything it had. The destroyers Swift and Hunter coordinated their fire, striking the shields of the third enemy vessel. But the Vex did not break. They were battle-hardened warships with crews that had fought humans before. They began to fall back in a coordinated retreat, all three ships moving in the same direction while maintaining fire on the attacking human fleet. Brooks saw what was happening. The Vex were not running in panic. They were executing a tactical withdrawal, which meant they were planning to regroup and counterattack. "Helm, plot an intercept course," Brooks ordered. "Navigation, I want us in front of those ships. Make them choose between hitting us or hitting the colony. We are going to block their line of fire." The Valiant accelerated toward the enemy formation. It was a dangerous maneuver, exactly the kind of thing that got ships destroyed. But it was also exactly what the colony needed. The Vex warships would have to either fire on the human ships or fire on the colony. They could not do both. The Valiant positioned itself between the Vex fleet and the planet below. Brooks felt the impact as enemy fire struck the human warship's shields. The Valiant shook, and for a moment the lights in the corridors dimmed as power was diverted to shield reinforcement. "Shields holding," the tactical officer reported. "We are taking sustained fire, but the colony is no longer under direct attack." Brooks nodded. That was exactly what he wanted. Around him, his crew worked with practiced efficiency. The gunnery crews coordinated their fire. The shield operators redistributed power as needed. The engineering team kept the propulsion systems running and the engines producing the power they needed to fight. The other human ships continued their attack on the Vex formation. The Mars scored a hit on the third Vex cruiser that caused one of its weapon emplacements to go dark. The Swift and Hunter launched a coordinated missile volley that forced the first Vex destroyer to pull back even further. The Vex were beginning to realize that they had miscalculated. They had expected to find a helpless colony and a single research vessel. Instead, they found themselves facing a coordinated military fleet that was willing to die to protect civilians. Captain Lisa on the Meridian watched the battle unfold. She saw the Vex forces being pressed back. She saw the human warships taking fire and continuing to fight. She saw something she had not expected to see when the Meridian received the distress call from the colony. She saw hope. "Keep firing," Lisa ordered her crew. "Press every advantage. These ships came to help us. Let us help them." In the colony bunker, Governor was watching the battle on the live feed from the cameras they had hidden on the surface. He saw the Vex ships being pushed back. He saw the human warships moving with purpose and coordination. He felt hope rise in his chest, a hope he had not felt since the Vex appeared on the horizon. He turned to the people around him in the bunker. Children and adults alike were staring at the screens, watching the battle unfold above them. "It is going to be all right," said. "Help came, human help, they came to protect us." One of the Vex ships suddenly changed course. It broke formation and moved away from the battle, accelerating toward the edge of the system. The commander of the second Vex cruiser saw this and made the same decision. The third ship followed seconds later. The Vex Dominion believed in honor, but they also believed in survival. When they realized they were facing an enemy that was willing to sacrifice everything to protect innocents, when they understood that human warships would not break and retreat no matter how much damage they took, they made the logical decision to withdraw. Brooks watched the Vex ships accelerate away from the system. He wanted to order a pursuit, to drive the enemy back into deep space where they could do no more harm. But his orders from Commander Hayes were clear. "Let them go," Hayes transmitted. "Focus on rescue operations. Get those people off that planet." Vex commander on the lead destroyer, a being called, watched the human ships on his sensors and tried to understand what was happening. The data made no sense. His 3 warships had superior firepower. His vessels were larger. His weapons were more advanced. By every calculation, the humans should have been destroyed already. But they were still fighting. They were still maneuvering. They were still pressing forward with a coordination that seemed to defy the odds. On the bridge of the USS Valiant, Captain Brooks was executing a maneuver that his tactical team had been planning for months. It was a complex sequence of moves that required perfect timing and communication. The Valiant would accelerate into a curved path that would bring them around the flank of the Vex destroyer, while simultaneously exposing only their thickest armor to enemy fire. "Helm, execute maneuver sequence Alpha 3, Brooks commanded. The helm officer, a veteran named William, made the necessary adjustments. The Valiant began to move, not in a straight line, but in a calculated curve that the simple logic of space combat. The human ship twisted and rolled, moving in 3 dimensions in a way that the Vex were not expecting. The Vex destroyer's weapons tried to track the Valiant, but the human ship was moving too fast, changing course too suddenly. The weapon's fire that should have connected instead found only empty space. At the same time, the 2 human destroyers were coordinating their own attack. The Swift and the Hunter were using their speed to their advantage, moving in patterns that required split-second communication between the 2 ships. Their missiles came from unexpected angles. Their weapons' fire came from positions the Vex had not anticipated. The Apollo and Mars were applying constant pressure, keeping the 3 Vex ships busy, preventing them from forming up into a unified defensive formation. Commander Hayes had understood something fundamental about the Vex. They were good at direct assault. They were less good at defending against multiple coordinated attacks from different directions. On his tactical display, the Vex commander watched his shields drop. One of his weapon emplacements went offline. His communications officer reported that the second cruiser was also taking heavy damage. "Return fire," ordered. "Focus all weapons on the largest target. Destroy the human vessel that is between us and the planet." The Valiant took a barrage of incoming fire. The energy weapons of the 3 Vex ships converged on the human warship. The impact was tremendous. The Valiant's shields flared bright with the impact of the energy discharge. Alarms sounded throughout the ship. In the engineering room, Chief Engineer Frank felt the impacts as if they were physical blows. The engines had not been designed to take this much abuse. But the engines were not his only concern. The Valiant was held together by steel and will, and the crew's will to fight was not wavering. "All hands brace for impact," Frank transmitted. "Divert power from non-essential systems. Give everything to the shields and engines." The lights in several corridors dimmed as power was diverted. The crew adapted without complaint. They had trained for this. They understood the mathematics of survival. Power in weapons and shields meant more power needed from somewhere else. In the tactical department, Brooks watched the Valiant take the hits. The shields were holding, but barely. The ship was being pushed to its limits. "Weapons free," Brooks commanded. "All batteries, fire everything we have." The Valiant opened up with every weapon system it possessed. Missiles streamed out of the launch tubes. Phaser banks sent continuous streams of energy across space. The human warship was no longer fighting for survival alone. It was fighting to win. The weapons officer, Robert, was coordinating all of the ship's firepower with a precision that bordered on art. He was aiming not at the thickest armor, but at the shield generators. He was targeting the weapon emplacements that had caused the most damage. He was doing what humans did best. He was adapting. He was thinking. He was using intelligence instead of just brute force. One of the Vex destroyer's shield generators overloaded. The system failed explosively, and suddenly a massive section of the enemy ship's hull was exposed. The Valiant's weapons concentrated on that location. Armor plates ruptured. Internal systems were exposed. The Vex destroyer began to suffer serious damage. Lieutenant Sarah, the tactical officer on the bridge, called out the damage assessment. "Enemy destroyer is breaking up. Power signatures dropping. The other 2 ships are beginning to disengage." Brooks saw it on his display. The 3 Vex warships were no longer pressing the attack. They were beginning to move away from the colony. They were beginning to retreat. But Brooks did not celebrate yet. Retreat was not the same as surrender. The Vex might be falling back to regroup. They might be planning a second attack. They might be calculating the odds of a counteroffensive. "Do not ease fire," Brooks ordered. "Keep the pressure on. We are driving them away from this system." The human fleet continued to press forward. The Valiant pursued the lead Vex destroyer, weapons hot, constantly firing. The Mars and Apollo moved in on the other two enemy ships. The Swift and Hunter used their speed advantage to cut off any attempt at coordinated maneuvers. In the Vex command vessel was making a decision. The humans were stronger than they had any right to be. They were faster. They were more adaptable. They were fighting with a purpose that seemed to give them strength beyond what their ships should possess. Had fought many enemies. He had conquered worlds and crushed civilizations, but he had never encountered anything like this. The humans did not fight like other species. They did not value their own survival above all else. They had positioned their warships between their colony and the enemy. They had taken massive damage rather than expose the civilians to attack. This was an enemy that did not think like the Vex. This was an enemy that could not be intimidated. This was an enemy that would fight to the last soldier if it meant protecting their people. "Order all ships to break off engagement," commanded. "Set course for the jump gate. We are leaving this system." The three Vex warships began to accelerate away from 442B. They did not run in panic, but they did not slow down either. They were executing a full retreat. Commander Hayes, watching from the lead position, made his decision. "All ships cease fire, let them go. Our mission is accomplished." The human battle group stopped its pursuit. The weapons fell silent. The Valiant and its sister ships regrouped above the planet that they had been sent to save. Brooks stood on his bridge and allowed himself to breathe. The battle was over. The Vex were in retreat. The colony below was safe. "Damage reports," he ordered. His first officer compiled the information from all departments. The Valiant had taken heavy damage. Two of the shield generators were offline. One of the engines was operating below rated capacity. The hull had been breached in 2 compartments, but the ship was still flying. The crew was still alive. The colony evacuation began within the hour. Transport shuttles began to lift off from the surface of 442B, carrying the people who had almost died. Captain Lisa of the Meridian coordinated the lift operations from her bridge. The research vessel, damaged and worn from the battle, nevertheless moved into position to provide cover fire if the Vex should return. Below on the planet, Governor Henry was the last to leave the main colony bunker. He walked through the empty corridors that had been filled with people just hours before. The hydroponic gardens that had fed the settlement, the water processors that had kept them alive, the homes that families had built, all of it was being left behind. Found Victoria, his daughter, in the engineering section. She was making final checks on the structural supports, ensuring that the bunkers would remain stable even if the Vex decided to bombard the colony from orbit after their withdrawal. "It is time to go," said. Victoria nodded. She had known this was coming. She had known they would have to abandon everything they had built. But standing in the corridors that represented 5 years of human effort, it was hard to accept. "Will we come back?" Victoria asked. Did not answer immediately. He looked around the bunker and then back at his daughter. "Yes," he said finally. "With more ships and more soldiers, with a fleet to protect us. We will rebuild this colony, and it will be stronger than before. The Vex Dominion has learned that humans do not abandon their homes without a fight." They made their way to the evacuation point where a shuttle was waiting. The pilot, a woman named, was checking her departure sequence. She had made 12 flights already and would make more before the last person was off the planet. As the shuttle lifted off, looked down at the colony one more time. Somewhere in the darkness below, the colony's sensor array was still recording data. The mining equipment was still waiting. The hope of building a new world was still there, dormant but not dead. Above the planet, aboard the USS Valiant, Captain Brooks was managing the receiving of the evacuation shuttles. The hangar bay crew was working at maximum capacity, bringing shuttles into the bay as quickly as possible. But there were 2,400 people to move, and the process would take time. "How many more shuttles?" Brooks asked his operations officer, a man named David. 12 more loads, David reported. "The colony has 3 shuttles operating on 2-hour cycles. All should be complete within 6 hours. Brooks nodded. 6 hours was time enough for the Vex to reconsider their retreat and return. But Brooks was not worried about the Vex. He was worried about his people and making sure every single colonist made it to safety. "Get me Commander Hayes," Brooks ordered. Hayes appeared on the communication screen moments later. The commander of the human fleet was on the bridge of his own ship, the heavy cruiser Mars. Behind him, Brooks could see his crew working to manage the damage from the battle. "Captain, what do you need?" Hayes asked. "I want to position the Valiant in orbit directly above the evacuation zone," Brooks said. "If the Vex return, we will be in position to engage them before they can launch another bombardment." Hayes did not hesitate. "Do it. All other ships will maintain a defensive perimeter around the planet. The Swift and Hunter will take high orbit and watch for any Vex ships attempting to re-enter the system." Brooks nodded and ended the communication. He turned to his helm officer. "Move us into position above the colony, full power to shields, keep weapons ready." The Valiant moved with careful precision. The damaged ship, with one engine operating below capacity and two shield generators offline, still moved with the grace of a warship in motion. The crew had learned its capabilities and its limits during the battle. Now they moved it into a position of maximum protection. In the colony bunker, the last group of people was preparing for evacuation. Dr. Hart was making final checks to ensure all his medical equipment was accounted for. He had decided to take only the most critical supplies. The rest would be recovered later when the human fleet had more capacity. The people who remained in the bunker were mostly the last of the support staff. Engineers, maintenance personnel, the people who had made sure the colony functioned day to day. They gathered their personal items. Most took nothing. There was no time for sentiment. There was only time for survival. The last shuttle lifted off at exactly 1700 hours. Below it, the colony fell silent. No more people moved through the corridors. No more equipment hummed with operation. The colony that had been alive just hours before now was a tomb of steel and stone waiting for its people to return. Governor watched the planet fall away beneath the shuttle. Around him, other colonists pressed against the small windows to see their home disappear into the darkness above. Some were crying. Some were angry. Some were simply numb. By the time the last shuttle docked with the Valiant, it was already night on the planet below. 442b rotated beneath the human fleet, unaware that it had been the center of a battle that would echo across the galaxy. Commander Hayes called a meeting in the Valiant's briefing room. Captain Brooks, the commanders of the other ships, and key members of the rescue operations team were all present. Governor was brought in from the medical bay where the colonists were being processed and provided with medical care and temporary quarters. "The evacuation is complete," David reported. "All 2,400 colonists are aboard the human fleet. We have some medical cases that need attention, but no critical injuries. The colony suffered severe damage from the bombardment, but the underground facilities remained intact." Hayes nodded. "Good work, everyone. The evacuation exceeded my expectations for speed and efficiency. Now we need to prepare for the next phase of operations." He turned to, "Governor, what are your intentions? Do you wish to return to human space, or are you interested in remaining in this system?" Considered the question carefully. Around the room, the officers waited for his answer. They had fought to protect the colony. They had risked their ships and their lives, but ultimately the decision about the colony's future belonged to its people. "We will go back to human space for now," said. "The colony needs repairs. The people need time to recover, but we will return. We will rebuild. The Vex Dominion will learn that humans do not abandon their settlements because of a fight we win." Hayes smiled slightly. It was the answer he had expected. "Then we will establish a permanent garrison here. The Swift and Hunter will remain in system with supplies for 6 months. They will provide protection and help with rebuilding the colony infrastructure. The rest of the fleet will escort the civilian shuttles back to human space." Brooks looked at the tactical display on the wall. The Vex ships were long gone, detected at the edge of the system, and then lost as they moved into jump space. They were running, and they were not looking back. The battle was over, the colony was saved, humanity had won. But Brooks knew this was just the beginning. The Vex had learned today that humans were not to be underestimated, but there were other species in the galaxy, other predators that believed weakness should be punished. This victory would echo, and some would listen. Some would see humanity and begin to understand what they were dealing with. Over the next few days, the human fleet prepared for the long journey back to human space. The colonists were distributed among all 5 ships, with priority care given to the elderly, the young, and those who had been injured. The crew of the Valiant worked to repair the damage sustained during the battle. New shield generators were installed. The damaged engine was brought back to full capacity. When the fleet finally jumped to hyperspace, leaving 442B behind, there was a sense of accomplishment aboard every human vessel. They had answered a distress call. They had fought an enemy and won. They had saved 2,400 lives. Captain Brooks stood on the bridge of the Valiant as the planet disappeared behind them. Lieutenant Sarah stood beside him, also watching the final moments of the colony in normal space. "Do you think they will come back?" asked. "The Vex, I mean." Brooks considered the question. "Eventually, maybe, but not soon. They will have to report this battle to their superiors. They will have to explain how they were defeated by a human fleet. That is not something the Vex leadership will want to hear." He paused and then continued. "But there is something more important. Every species in the galaxy is watching now. They are all asking the same question. If the Vex cannot defeat the humans, what does that mean for them? That is the message we send today. Humanity protects its own. Humanity answers the call. Humanity does not leave people behind." The Valiant jumped to hyperspace, carrying 2,400 colonists back to safety. But the message it left behind would travel much further than any ship could go. The message that humanity was a force to be reckoned with, a force that would not break, a force that would fight to the last soldier to protect the innocent. In the colony bunker on 442B, the empty corridors fell silent. But the silence was temporary. Humans would return. The colony would be rebuilt. And next time it would be protected by more than hope and courage. It would be protected by the knowledge that the From Earth always answered their call. More importantly, the colony was still alive. 2,400 people were alive because humans had answered their distress call. Humans had fought against overwhelming odds. Humans had refused to let innocents die. This was what separated humanity from the rest of the galaxy. This was what made humans dangerous. They did not fight for conquest or resources. They fought because people needed protection. They fought because leaving their own behind was unacceptable. The Vex had learned today what the rest of the galaxy would eventually learn. Never underestimate a species that values the lives of their citizens more than their own safety. Brooks nodded and turned his attention to the colony below. The bombardment had stopped. The Vex were running. Now the real work would begin. Now they would have to save 2,400 people from a dying world, extract them from the bunkers, and get them to safety aboard the human ships. But as Brooks looked at his crew, as he saw them work together without complaint, without hesitation, he knew they would do it. They would rescue every single person on that colony because that was what humans did. They protected the innocent. They answered the call. They did not leave their own behind. And somehow, the Vex were only now learning what that meant. He saw courage. He saw determination. He saw the human spirit that had driven people to build civilization to protect the weak, to stand against darkness. They were coming to save people, and nothing in the galaxy would stop them. "Captain, we are not doing any damage." "I know," Lisa replied. "But we are still fighting. Send out the distress signal again. All frequencies, all power, make sure every human ship in this sector knows what is happening here." George moved to comply as the Meridian took its first hit from enemy return fire. The ship shook, and alarms began to sound. But Lisa remained still in her chair, watching the battle unfold below, watching the people she could not save, and hoping that somehow, somewhere, someone would hear her call and come. In the bunker, Governor held the hands of a child next to him. The child was maybe 7 years old, too young to understand what was happening, but old enough to be scared. Whispered words of comfort that he did not believe, and he waited for rescue that seemed impossible, and he wondered how long hope could burn before it simply went out.